Growing up, there are a few traditions I could always count on. For example, I knew that every summer we'd make the 12-hour flight to visit my grandparents in Israel. I love my grandparents, but I was not a fan of that long flight. I knew that every Thanksgiving dinner would be epic, like leftovers for days kind of epic. And my family also observed the Sabbath every Sunday. And they didn't mean that we had to literally rest and not have fun, but I knew that every Sunday would be about spending time with the family. Most of my traditions were built around a holiday or some kind of break from school, whenever the rhythm of life was just different. But there was one tradition that happened every day at school. Each morning before class began, we'd all stand up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. If you grew up in America as a kid, I bet most of you took part in this tradition too. I always struggled, however, with one word, and that word is indivisible. My first and main problem? Just pronouncing the word. That's a lot of syllables for a first grader. But I also struggled to understand just what the word meant. And eventually I learned that it was a big way of saying united. It was a statement that said, as Americans, we couldn't be divided. This is the ideal, right? Unity is a good and noble goal. But as we grow older and leave childhood behind, we realize that this ideal isn't exactly a reality. In fact, at this point in time, our country is the exact opposite of unified. And nowhere is this disunity more apparent than the world of politics. And that's because politics don't unite people. Politics are designed to divide. Because if you agree with one side, then chances are you automatically disagree with the other side. In politics, people take a side because they believe their side is right? They want good things for our country, and they believe that their side and their approach and their vision is the right way to make those good things happen. Politics are just divisive by nature. It's not a bad thing to disagree though, but over the past few years, the expression of this disagreement has gotten heated, personal, and even at times extreme. In fact, we can probably all agree that our unity is at an all-time low. We see this division everywhere. We see it on the news, we read about it online, we hear it in the break room, we notice it as we scroll through Facebook. And in the old days, before social media was everything and around us all the time, we could all take a break from politics every 4 years, or every 2 years if you're really into the midterms. But now, political news is seemingly a year-round phenomenon. In the age of social media and partisan news channels, it seems every day has new and urgent political news. And maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing if it felt helpful to be so informed, but the truth is, it doesn't feel helpful, right? I'd say our well-informed brains are on overload. We can't handle all the news and information we encounter. We're tired, we're numb. No matter what side we're on, we're over the nonstop conflict. Now, what's interesting is that, in general, most of us don't love conflict. We don't want to feel road rage. We aren't looking to pick a fight with our roommate or spouse. We don't want to yell at our kids. We aren't anxious for a chance to verbally assault someone with whom we disagree. No, normally, we feel tension start to rise and we retreat. We pull away, we avoid. Some of us here may be very engaged in politics and sharing how we feel, but for a lot of us, we handle these disagreements like we handle any conflict. We avoid. We avoid talking to that person in the office kitchen. We stay away from that other dad at your kid's soccer game. We're conveniently busy when we find out that a certain friend is going to be a part of the group outing on Friday. And when it comes to people who belong to that political party, who vote that way, who like that candidate, well, the choice is easy. We stay away from them completely. We don't want to live in anger, tension, and frustration, and those people make us feel all of those things. The thing is, avoiding people does work. We can manipulate our social circles and our friend groups and our acquaintances in a way where we're only surrounded by people who think just like us. And honestly, there's peace in that approach. But at what cost? What if in our desire to avoid conflict and stay at peace in our own minds and in our own worlds, we're missing something we were never meant to miss? What if there's actually a better way to handle conflict and people who are so different from us, even different politically? Jesus actually provides us insight into this very issue. We find his words on the matter in the book of Matthew. At this point in his life, Jesus has made some provocative statements, getting the attention of both the people and the religious leaders. And on top of that, he'd performed some big miracles. So needless to say, people were paying attention. He had a huge following. In modern terms, if he wanted to, the time was right to become an influential leader in that culture. Instead, Jesus began recruiting anything but influencers. The story begins here. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. If Jesus had a public relations guy, he wouldn't be happy with this move. Remember, the crowds were loving Jesus. But do you know who the crowds didn't love? Tax collectors. Tax collectors were Jewish men who worked for the oppressive Roman government. So basically, they were traitors. They had permission to overtax the people and keep the extra money for themselves. They were shady, unethical, and unpopular. Now, if Jesus was interested in becoming popular and famous, all he had to do was keep turning water into wine, healing sick people, and multiplying meals. In other words, if Jesus was interested in a low conflict, low frustration, low tension ministry, asking a tax collector to be his disciple was not the way to get there. But the story goes on. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" When Jesus heard this, he said, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do." Then he added, "Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners." Jesus didn't choose an easy route. He didn't isolate himself from people who were different than him. He wasn't picky about who he spent his time with. I mean, after all, Jesus even brought along the guy who would eventually betray him to the people who would kill him. Jesus wasn't interested in surrounding himself with yes men who only agreed with him, thought like him, and acted like him. No, instead, Jesus had something else in mind: mercy. And not just mercy in the sense of forgiving sins. Jesus was interested in mercy as it related to kindness and compassion, meaning he kept company with people who others might have written off. Not because it was easy, not because it made him popular, not because it improved his reputation. He did this because even though others viewed these people as liabilities, Jesus saw them as humans. So instead of moving away from them, he moved toward them. Instead of judging them, he learned their names. Instead of making a public example of them, he shared a meal with them. Instead of writing them off, he made them friends. Today, we're living in a time when it has never been easier or more tempting to isolate ourselves from people we don't understand and can't seem to agree with. And sure, it might benefit our emotional health a bit to isolate ourselves from those people, but what are we losing in our effort to keep the peace and keep our distance from those who think differently? Because the more we isolate ourselves from others, the less human and real and relatable those others become. The more we pull away from those who are different, the more different we become. Not just in what we believe, but in how we see each other. If we only ever see the other side as a group, as those Republicans, those Democrats, those libertarians, those upper class people, those lower class people, those whatever, then we'll never get close enough to see them as Jesus does, as people with names and histories and families and stories and pain and accomplishments and a whole host of other things that makes them real people and not just groups we can't understand. When we get close enough to the other side, we'll no longer see them for how we're different, but for how we're the same. If we want to move toward being unified and move away from being divided, we need to pick people over politics. So practically speaking, how do we do this? How do we begin to relate to people instead of avoiding them? There are probably lots of ways, but here are 2 ways to get started. First, move toward people who vote differently than you. Think of that neighbor, that friend, that coworker, even that family member who votes in a way that you can't understand. And then make time for coffee, or a meal, or a walk, where you talk about something other than politics. Because just spending time with someone is a powerful reminder that the people with whom we disagree politically are still people, and we need to see them as such. And the second way, look for commonalities. In a culture where our differences are highlighted, make an effort to look for the areas where we're the same. Pay attention to the things, big and small, that draw us together. It isn't always easy to see these things right away, but they're there. Don't stop trying to find those commonalities. We can find something in common with just about anyone if we're intentional about it. I wish we could talk to the people Jesus spent time with. I'd like to talk to people like Matthew, the tax collector, or the woman caught in adultery, humiliated by her own people, or the woman at the well, cut off from her community because of her lifestyle. This group of people is special because they experience the kind of mercy found simply in someone's presence, in someone's friendship, in someone's intentional time. To them, mercy wasn't found in a physical healing or some type of miracle. To them, mercy was being known and befriended and accepted. We live in complicated, tense times, but what if we saw this moment not as a chance to isolate, pull away, and avoid, but as a chance to show mercy to those on the other side? Mercy in the form of kindness and gentleness and curiosity and understanding. Mercy in the form of company with those we don't agree with, but who we're learning to see as more than just their political beliefs. Maybe the idea of staying sane in the political news cycle feels nearly impossible, but if we can't count on the people in charge or the media we consume to bring about change in how we treat each other, how we see each other, and what we believe about each other, maybe it's up to us. And maybe Jesus shows us exactly how it's done. Today, take some time to think about the people you may be isolated from. Who have you pulled away from because your differences have felt so overwhelming and your misunderstandings too large? Think of the groups of people or the individuals you may have avoided because of their otherness. Then, think of what you might be able to do to show them mercy, to see them differently, to invite them into the space of your life. What would it look like to offer mercy through your presence to everyone on all parts of the political spectrum? It just might be the most sane and most peaceful way to live in our divided